This novel has a character with really bad skin in it. Very ugly, disturbing skin. And that novel is The Third Reich by Robert Bolaño. This is my third Bolaño book. I read one short story, but I also read Savage Detectives and 2666. And this is like, oh my god, I forgot to say it. Like, after his death, this came out, but the time period he wrote this in is probably his first novel. And it's so strange he didn't publish it because even with its flaws, this would have been an amazing debut. So let's get past plot because plot just takes up so much time. It's about a couple who is in Spain. They're German and they're having a vacation and they meet up with another couple and they meet up with a guy with like burnt skin and the main guy he plays a game called The Third Reich, which is actually a real game. And in that game, it's about like he just obsesses over it, and it's about like the axis of war during World War II and trying to navigate that board game. And he writes about it, and it's just about his descent into a slow, weird kind of mania as he plays the game further and further along with El Quemado, which is a Spaniard who has, again, burnt skin and who works on the ferry boats. Now, I might miss a lot of details in this review, and that's because I reviewed this with the guys at Spinecrackers, a great podcast. I'm good friends with them, and we talked about it for like 3, 4 hours. So if I miss some stuff, just know I talked this book to death already. But check out, I'll put the link in the description. Now, this all has all the hallmarks of a great Bolaño book. Bolaño is very great at ambiguity. He just wields it to such an amazing degree, and there's some things in the novel which I'm not sure if he necessarily has answers for, but if he does or he doesn't, it just creates a great tone in the novel. Paul, who's a big Murakami fan in the Spinecrackers podcast, I brought this up and he said he felt the same way. This is like a really good Murakami book. And it doesn't have any of like the surreal or magical elements that Murakami uses, and so it doesn't have any of those cop outs. So there are some weird things in the novel that don't necessarily add up, but if you're into that kind of style but you want it better, this would be a great book. And what I mean by the ambiguity is that there's certain things that just don't line up where they feel like they should, or just first off, the name of the novel is The Third Reich, but like, and the main character is German. But like this takes place way after World War II, and the focus is on a vacation and a board game. So it just to put it as the central title of the novel is a very strong thing. And he has a love interest at the hotel named Fran Els, which there is a movie called Fran Els. That's an Argentine movie and a German movie. You know, it's suspected in conspiracy. Well, I think a lot of Nazis did, but it's suspected that Hitler went to Argentina after the war. And you know, it's about a German man playing a board game and his mental health deteriorating. Kind of like the arc of Hitler towards the end of the war. So with Bolaño, there's all these certain parallels, but they just don't quite add up. They just like barely miss each other. And it adds a sort of surreal element to the book. And if you feel like those answers and then you don't feel like those answers, but then that's also reflected in the characters as well. Like, there's this scene where the woman at the hotel desk, her husband works in the hotel, and he's been trying to sleep with this woman. He saw her during childhood, and it was like an early sexual experience. Not that he had sex with her or anything, but you know, he just saw a really pretty girl early in his life and fell in love with her. So to see it again, it just kind of activates that. And this guy's like a super shadowy figure. He's the boss of the hotel. You never see him. It's mentioned multiple times that he lives above the kitchen in a windowless room and that it's super dark. And when he does see him, all of his suspicions about him are right, because he was like, this guy's going into my room. This guy's looking at my hotel game. He's helping El Quemado. He's stalking the premises. He's trying to, he knows about me and his wife. He's plotting against me. And he is. And he's like, oh yeah, man, like I know about your board game. I looked at it. Yeah, I talked to El Quemado, but he's really smart. He got it down pretty quickly. And he's like, yeah. And he implies like, yeah, you think you can sleep with my wife. Like he implies that his wife is having a third affair, but not with the main character. And he kind of said like, yeah, she's not gonna have an affair with you, buddy. You know, she's out of your league. And so then he just kind of disappears throughout the novel. And it's just that one scene. But it's so weird. That so many of his suspicions were confirmed. But he has no basis for that. happens. And it's things like that. Or, and this is a spoiler at the very end of the novel, he's like, El Camaro's gonna kill me. And even the boss one's like, hey man, be careful. This guy might kill you, pretty much. Like, heavily implies it. It's like, oh, once he wins this game, he's gonna kill me. And El Camaro picks the game up really fast. Like, they seem like good friends, but then they seem very antagonistic to each other. And El Camaro is very quiet while the main character is talking a whole bunch. But then in the games, are very silent, and you can never get a good read. And he always has this underlying fear of El Camaro. At the end of the novel, when he does lose and he's like, oh God, he's gonna kill me, he takes him to the paddle boats, and because he sets him up like a little hut so he can sleep in, because he sleeps on the beach, and he just shows him a light, and then he laughs at him, and it's like, what? And it was disguised as a ghostly apparition, which relates to a further scene in the novel, earlier scene in the novel, where the couple's friend Henry dies out in the ocean after he starts hanging out with these two guys that are locals and kind of named Wolf and Lamb, and who are kind of weird. And he talks about one time where he goes to the paddle boats and he's like, I'm afraid I might see his ghost. That might be him talking right now, and it wasn't. And so there's this parallel with him being so afraid of seeing a ghost, and Henry's ghost explicitly, and that Lantern at the end described as a ghost, but then nothing happens and his mania kind of ends and he just goes back to Germany. It's those loose connections. It's that you also see in other Bolaño books, like in 2666. The one that strikes me the most is when a character puts a geometry book on a clothesline for it to drive, and he's just staring at it like, man, dude, that geometry book is just on that clothesline. And it's one of those things, it's such a striking scene, and it's always stayed with me. But like, I don't know what it means. You can tell the character doesn't know what it means. I've asked other people and they don't know what it means. So it's like that real world where us, the reader, doesn't know, and the fictional sense the characters don't know what it means, but it holds that significance. He's just so good at capturing that. And that's what a lot of this novel feels like. Now, mind you, he does construct this better later in his true magnum opuses. It feels a lot more justified. I can kind of see where he kind of ran out of steam at the end of the book, and maybe some of this stuff is not ambiguous, but it's like, oh, I just couldn't get it the way I wanted, and it's kind of rushed. We talk about that a lot on the podcast. But regardless whether it's rushed or not, the effect is still there, and the book is really good because of it. Another big theme with Bolaño is that he really goes to the underlying tension of male machismoism and that underlying competition and tension between males. Machismoism is really stupid. If you ever met somebody who's machismo in real life, they're really big bitches and like they fly off the rail. But it's really important to state machismoism because, you know, that's pretty typical of Mexican and Latin American culture. And there is usually that one-up game and stuff like that. When you meet people like that, it's like they're always kind of vying to get a one-up on you. And that's what you feel like here, as you feel in 2666 as well in Savage Detectives. Well, the men are always at a point of competition to the point where it might lead to violence. And it's also like a sexual competition as well. The best way I can describe this, there's a Luis Borges stories where this guy goes to a town, and at the end of the story, he pisses off a guy and he has to get into a knife fight with him. And he's like, I just have to. That is a really good way to look at Bolaño's work. You definitely read that story. It's a great lens. It's that thing where it's like, well, my masculinity is so important that I have to. It's not even a choice in a lot of ways. It's like, you have to put your life on the line. And you see that a lot where Lamb and Wolf, where he's like, oh, you know, Lamb's got some hierarchy over Wolf. Something happened. Like, he's taking the lead now and whatnot. Or you see that with Charlie. Well, even though he did messed up stuff, and, you know, there's one scene where he does go out into the ocean. He thinks he's going to die, but he comes back. And it's like he's trying to one up the characters. He's trying to show Lamb and Wolf that, like, no, I can hang. I can do this. I'm stronger than you guys. And even the main character is like, no, man, I got this. Like, you're acting up. Like, Henry beats his girlfriend at one point, and when the main character confronts him about it, it's like he's focusing really hard, not really hard, but he's focusing to be calm in the situation. It's almost like this implicit thing where, like, if I show any emotions, if I react violently to this situation, Henry has the one up on me. And Henry, in the meantime, is trying to act nonchalant towards the abuse as well. And they're both trying to navigate this and call each other out without becoming too overly emotional. There's even one part where Henry's death is speculated that he was raped by a group of men, but we're not too sure about it. And he dies later by going paddleboarding in the ocean. And, they find his paddleboard, they eventually find his body. But it's like one of the, oh my God. If you read Baki the Grappler, there's a scene where they say Yujiro is such a man that he sees all other men as feminine. And one chapter, he rapes a dude. And the dude is like, oh yeah, man, I started rock climbing, hang gliding, doing all this dangerous stuff because I found my inner female and I try to reclaim my masculinity. That's a very toxic and strange way to look at it, but it's Baki. But that kind of relates to this novel as well, where it's like, hey, if this dude was raped, maybe he did go on that crazy thing paddleboarding just to reclaim his masculinity in a lot of ways. And again, you don't get a clear answer on these things, so it just gives it that weirdness to it. But I will say, I do feel like a lot of the weirdness is intentional because you see other characters have ideas and assumptions about the main character and his motives that the main character wasn't even thinking of. Fran Ellis has a scene like that where he's questioning why Quamato is coming into his room and whatnot, and how he might push guests away, and what he's planning, and how he might not leave. And the fact that other characters have different perceptions on the situation, it just makes the world feel a lot more grounded, and it feels like a bigger world. Now, for the character's mania, it's really strange because it happens after Henry dies. But he's not that attached to Henry. He just met him. He kind of thinks he's an ass. And he refuses to leave Spain until the body's found. But it almost seems like such a secondary thing. It's like Henry triggered his mania, but at the same time it didn't. It's like that's the starting line. Like, okay, this is when my mania starts. But Henry's not the reason. The reason seems to be more the Third Reich and his relationship with El Quamato. It's almost like when his girlfriend goes back to Germany and Holly, the other girl, goes back to Germany as well. It's almost like he has room to explore this and really just delve into his passion without inhibition, to a dangerous point where he almost loses his job. He keeps asking his employer for money. He misses the deadline to write an article. His girl is super worried about him. And he's trying to sleep with Fran Ellis during this time. They even explicitly talk about sex. They make out. And she's like, when it's ready, it's ready. And he's kind of pushy as well. And also, there's a almost rape scene with Wolf and Lamb. And rape is kind of mentioned early in the novel, where they rape the maid that cleans his hotel every day. And he opens the door to kind of like, okay, well, you're exposed, you can't do anything. And then she leaves, and he's like, okay, well, they just have a casual conversation. He goes out for drinks. Like, yo, man, if somebody tried to rape a girl, you pretty well and hang out with him. But the next day, he's like, I worked on the Third Reich. I wrote a letter to my editor. Fuck this girl. It just goes on like, wait, did I read that right? Wait, did he dream about that? Was that what he's trying to say? And you read it like, no, he fucked the maid. And she turns out to be 16. I don't know the age of consent in Spain. And the weird part about it, even if you want to say it is of the legal age, it's still like, besides what her age is, it's still kind of toxic because it's almost something that just happens and it's like he's not even invested in her. And the way they have sex as well is, it's like he just describes like, yeah, if I saw her from a bird's eye view, I wouldn't even just see her body. I'm just on top of her. It's like, do you like it? Like, yeah. And it's like, this is this is some very unpassionate love, but it's just kind of happening. The fact that she's a teenager, and then she works at the hotel, and he gives her money at the end of it too. It just makes it like, this guy's a big skeeve. However, I also want to do a side tangent. Even though there's criticism of masculinity here, it's also with the acknowledgement that the women in this novel go for that type of masculinity. Fran Ellis is somebody who's kind of into him and also entertains him, even though she's not the most trusting of him and he shows dangerous tendencies. The maid still continues to have sex with him without him really forcing her to. Henry's girl stays with him even after she beats her, and they go to a party and she's all happy and giddy, and she left her kid in Germany to go on this vacation with him. So it's kind of like an indictment of machismoism and this masculinity, but also saying like, hey, these women go for it. It's a system that goes back and forth, and you can't blame one side without blaming the other as well. But back to the mania part, he's just losing it. His sleep schedule's even more off, and he was already the weirdo staying inside the hotel and not going out with his girlfriend. But he's smoking crazy, he's not eating right, and he's just obsessing over El Cremado. This burn victim guy who's from Argentina, who may or may not have been burned by Nazis in Argentina or at the war. So then you start to think, oh God, is this Cremado's way of getting revenge on the situation, on another German man? It's just culminating to this point where this guy's about to lose everything. And he does lose his girl at the end of the novel, but they still have sex and they decide to be friends. Typical. And he works at another job afterwards, but you think it's going to reach its critical mass point. But after the Latin scare, it's like he just knocks it off and just goes back home. And if these elements aren't sounding that great to you, it works a lot better in the novel. And yeah, it is a little sloppy, I think. And when I say sloppy, I mean in regards to Bolaño's later works where he does it a lot better. But it's just that very particular ambiguity that just gives his books a surreal resonance that you don't get in a lot of other books. But yeah, that's The Third Reich by Robert Bolaño. Again, there's a lot more I didn't talk about. Go listen to Spinecrackers. But check out this book. Let me know if you read it. Let me know what Bolaño I should read next. He's eventually an author. I'm going to read all of his works. But I don't know if I'm going to review all of them because I did Savage Detectives like a few months before I started my YouTube channel. So, oops. But yeah, guys, later.